Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of When Docs Talks, the ABCs of OOO. What you need to know about the big O, orgasms and women's sexual health. We're so happy you've joined us for part 2, and we have got a show for you today. We're going to delve into the female genital anatomy and really talk about what parts are doing what during this whole mystery of orgasm. Hopefully, it won't be too much of a mystery to you after this episode, because we're also going to have our expert guest talk a little bit about orgasm from several different perspectives: mind, body, and soul. What's going on in your pelvis? How do we optimize it from a psychiatric perspective? And also, what are some things that a gynecologist will share with us to let us know how to maximize orgasmic pleasure? And finally, we're going to let your voices be heard and let you know what you responded in our WDT orgasm survey. Welcome to When Docs Talk, the ABCs of OOO.
When docs talk, when docs talk, when docs talk, when docs talk. When docs talk, 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 when docs talk.
We talked about, the brain, and we talked about the parts. Let's talk about the parts more. We kind of put up a picture earlier that was intended for a little later, but I want us to discuss the female sexual anatomy. Okay. And the reason why I think it's important is because, we talk about these parts, but we forget that this is not something a lot of us really learned in depth in school. This is something that we either learned from talking to each other, some of us exploring ourselves, or reading. And it's important for us to know our sexual parts, because if we don't know it, it becomes difficult for us to really enjoy and explain what we like to our partners. And not just that, we'll talk about this a little later. There are certain toys and lubrications, and if you don't know where you're putting what, it's not going to be the full effect of what you want. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the female genital anatomy. We're going to do female anatomy 101. And I'm going to start with this picture. I'm going to throw it over to our Dr. Julianne Burt. This first picture is just to orient us, okay? Don't be shocked. I'm going to remind everyone this is mature content, but we really want everyone to understand what we're trying to do here. We want you to understand your bodies very, very well. Now, this is just to orient you. This is what we see as doctors when we're doing your pelvic exam. This is the orientation if you're lying back, and this is what your partner presumably will see. But I want to show this picture because it kind of magnifies the parts that we're going to talk about a little bit more. All right, Dr. Julianne, I'm throwing it over to you.
Sure. So I think the first thing that you notice is that the vagina, there's an arrow pointing to the vagina. Everything that you're looking at, that your partner is looking at, it's not the vagina. And we get this, I get this several times a day. I have, a discharge, or I have a lesion, or I have an itch on my vagina. And the vagina is the tube, that hole is like a black space that you can't see well from this angle. But if you would enter that space, that is the vagina. Everything else on the outside that is being depicted here is called the vulva. The vulva, the vulva, and that's important. At the top, you notice the clitoris. Then you notice the urethra. The urethra is a small tube that's connected to the bladder, and that is the tube that we urinate from. And then below the vagina, the third opening is the anus, from which you release your bowel movements from. And this is extremely important. I tell all of my young girls, the moms who bring their daughters, get a mirror. Well, first of all, we have these pictures in our office and we talk about it. But I try to empower everyone, but especially the younger patient, get a mirror. I say, lock the door because you don't want your little brother running in the room. And I want you to try to see what we just showed you on this monitor here. I want you to go home and I want you to find each of those areas. The outer lips, we usually use the term lips of the vagina. They're called the labia majora, the major lips. And the covering or the opening right outside of either side of the vaginal opening, we call the minor lips or the labia minora. So real quick and dirty, but it's important. I won't say who it was, but just about 3 or 4 years ago, there was this Essence article where a particular, very well-known gynecologist was saying in an interview, women should not put soap on their vagina or in their vagina. And I was screaming because, of course, I knew what she meant.
Right.
And no, you do not want to put soap inside the vagina. But I was thinking there was nowhere in that article that explained this female anatomy 101. So I have had, even to this day, several women who say, but I'm not supposed to wash down there, right? And I'm like, excuse me. So we have to go through female anatomy 101.
Yes.
Anything that grows hair, I don't care if you wax it or shave it, clip it, it's going to have some odor trap there. So I just encourage women to understand it. Thank you for taking the time to say it, because it's very important. I don't know how many of us learned in fifth grade or sixth grade. It went over my head. And the fact that I became a gynecologist is something
right.
amazing. But anyway.
Well, and and the thing is, I think we sometimes take for granted maybe what we learned in school. And I know, like when I was doing family medicine, the amount of, if I was telling that, they would bring their daughters in, you need to teach them about sex and da-da-da. And then I would sit there and I would talk to them about their bodies, and the mothers would be like, wow, I didn't know that, and these, and they never learned it.
Well, can I tell you just a quick, I'm full of stories, so I'm going to keep it brief. But
Yes.
I had a mother bring in her daughter. The daughter was about 13 at the time. She's still a patient. She's 19 now. But I said, so let's get started. And I put the picture up and I said, how many holes do you have down there? And she said, 3. And the mother said, what? Girl, no, there's only 2.
Oh, wow.
How do I?
So you gave mama a lesson then.
I had to, but very tactfully.
And let me ask you a question. Do you think now, though, with the internet and with access to information, to a certain degree, do you think young women come in a little bit more learned than, say, before, or no? It's, is it more misinformation?
Oh, no, I agree with you. Like,
Yeah.
But, so many areas where young people are just not ashamed. They're teaching me stuff, right? I'm like, so what do y'all call that now? So what do you do with that? Where does that ring go? Oh, I'm learning so much from them, and it's empowering, and I'm happy for them. I'm kind of ashamed that I've struggled so long myself as a young person. So yeah, I do agree that the information is out there and they are engaged and they understand it.
Oh, that's good.
Okay. Well, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what our viewers said about orgasm. So now, we've talked about the female anatomy. I want to jump into climax and women in climax. We did a survey of women, and it's an ongoing survey because this is going to be a series. This is part 1. But we wanted to know, whether our viewers had had an orgasm, whether they have orgasms most of the time when they have sex. And this is our women. We had men answer it too, but we stratified it by women and men. And then whether they found sex to be pleasurable. So I want to put up our viewers' responses. Then I want to get some feedback from our guest about this. Did these surprise you? So when we asked our viewers, have you had an orgasm? The vast majority said yes. With just very few out of the 101 that answered, or 104 actually who took the survey, said no. But then we asked them, do you have an orgasm every time you have sex? And the vast majority in that case said no. Okay. And then we wanted to know, we asked them at one point, are orgasms overrated? They said, nope, they're definitely important. And so we asked them, sex in itself, is it pleasurable? Do you find it pleasurable? Or we use some other adjectives that we put in there. We also gave them a space to answer if they had other. And the vast majority, I would say about 81%, said that they did find it pleasurable. But there were quite a few people who also had some other descriptors for sex. They called it painful, boring. They said it was a duty. Some said it was a mixture, sometimes pleasurable, sometimes boring. And so it just told us that, whether or not women orgasm or not, there are different perceptions as to what sex is. I want to talk about orgasm in general with our experts from the different perspectives that you would have. So I want to talk about orgasm from a psychiatric and psychosocial perspective. I want to talk about it from an anatomy perspective, especially for women who might have some pelvic floor dysfunction. And I want to talk about it from the perspective of somebody who often treats female sexual dysfunction or actually does treatments for female pleasure. So I know Dr. Julianne Birch in her clinic, she actually does certain things that are supposed to enhance and enrich orgasm. So who wants to go first? Because we got to hear what you got to say about orgasms. These ladies want to hear. Now the people.
I can go first.
Okay.
But can I give y'all a little, I wouldn't be a pelvic floor therapist if I didn't give you a little bit of anatomy from my end as far as this goes.
Please do.
It's critical when we're talking about an orgasm. So I want to talk about a few things that the pelvic floor does. And I have a model here. I wouldn't be.
Oh, yes, please bring it up so we can see it. Yes. Put it all the way up so our viewers can see it if you don't mind. And then center it. Perfect. There we go. Better? Yes.
This way. I'm sorry, y'all. So you see these two endpoints, these access points here, right? Your pelvic floor is technically divided into two. One side is more correlated with your bladder, your vagina more so. And the other side is more so correlated with your rectum and those posterior muscles, basically. So it's divided into two parts. These more superficial muscles here, they are the ones that are more, they contribute more to orgasm, let's say, the superficial muscles. So when they contract, they allow the clitoris to become erect, which we need that. We need it to be found quite easily for whoever said partner, so that it can be stimulated, therefore, and then pretty much set off our natural vaginal cascade. So think about your vaginal canal being lubricated, sweating naturally so that we're a little bit more comfortable. And then these deeper muscles here, and then also within here, you can't completely see, but all within there, they are truly responsible for that orgasm. And they all together need to be not in what we commonly think as far as like tightness. You know how that gets commonly talked about, like your vaginal muscles need to be tight.
Yeah.
They need to be tight. They need to be healthy. They need to be in the middle, somewhere just naturally resting. So that's what leads to that healthy orgasm, like a strong contraction. Being in the resting state, just being healthy, and then contracting strongly. And there's different types of orgasms, but I just want to give y'all a quick anatomy lesson as far as the musculoskeletal system within all this, because it's critical when we're talking about this orgasm.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Because, I didn't even think about the pelvic floor and the muscles working to do things like expose the clitoris by helping it to become more erect. Those are really important things. So thank you for that. So tell us, Dr. Kearse, about the other side of it. So tell us about the organ that's up here that you say dictates 100% orgasms.
Well, the reason, again, I say it's 100% is because your mind controls majority, or really controls all of your body movements. And in order for you to have an orgasm, you have to be able to think about it. You have to be able to relax yourself. You have to be able to relax those pelvic floor muscles that she just showed you. You have to be able to actually relax yourself enough to actually have something into you or not into you, whatever the case may be, depending on what type of sex you're having. You have to be able to envision yourself actually completing the act. You got to be able to feel what's going on. It's very different things that happen in your mind and that happens within all of your thought processing while you're going through the sexual stages. So from the first moment that you're actually just having, just kind of fooling around, for some reason I'm coming up with a blank. But
Foreplay.
yes, foreplay, there we go. And while you're having your foreplay thoughts are different than your actual intercourse thoughts. And your intercourse thoughts are actually different than your post-intercourse thoughts. So you have to be able to have all of these different stages in your mind before you can actually move on to having an orgasm. And I think a lot of women don't know that they have to have that. And what happens is they get a block, they get a mental block. And that mental block can come from anything. It can come from, several sexual dysfunctions that are well known, or it can come from trauma. It can come from, dislike of the partner, whatever the case may be. If there's a mental block, then the orgasm stops, but it can be stopped at any of those points. We're talking about stopping at the foreplay, the intercourse, and then post-intercourse. Then the orgasm can be stopped, because obviously orgasms for us don't just stop at, one orgasm, or sometimes just stop at the end of what the male feels is the end of our orgasm. We still have, things that go on. So it's a total mind thing, total mind-body connection thing.
Okay. So, Dr. Julianne, when is it not just the mind? When does the body or any sort of dysfunctions or problems with the body become a barrier?
Ooh. Well, gosh, that's a loaded question, but it's a good one, because oftentimes it's several different dysfunctions that are happening at the same time, or one dysfunction has now led to another dysfunction. What am I talking about? There are people who experience vaginismus, and if they are now trying to get into a relationship, it could be a cultural thing, it could be a religious thing, it could be because grandmama said, you don't do that thing, right? So they grew up, feeling like, ugh. It can depend, or it could be physiologic, right? It could be at the end or during pregnancy or in the postpartum period, while you're breastfeeding, especially, when you release, you're releasing hormones that go against the desires that we normally would have. So it is loaded, but I do want to add to this discussion before we go elsewhere. A lot of us, or most of us probably in medical school, we learned one way when it comes to the sexual cycle. We learned Masters and Johnson in the 1960s. We learned Masters and Johnson, and we were told it starts with desire. Then we get aroused because we thought about it. Then we get excited. That starts all in the brain. And the arousal, once it's in the brain, then sends a signal to our lady parts and a genitalia. I like the sweating, the natural sweating descriptive. And then we go to the orgasm, and then we go to a resolution phase. But there have been, I could think of 5 different models, but I wanted to speak of the Bassan model that speaks of women who start from sexual neutrality. And that's often the case. Not everybody is the initiator, right? Not many times. And that depends on you. That depends on your relationship. That depends on your past experiences, the trauma. I heard PTSD. Shoot, it could just be your past bad boyfriend just didn't do it for you. I mean,
right.
It could be different things. But the Bassan model says we could start at a neutral basis, right? That's the foundation of the day. We don't think about sex as often as men do, the stats always say. But if your partner has stimulated you throughout the day, if he has taken out the trash on Thursday, if he has helped with the baby, if he has, this thought for you what you're going to eat that night, if he has paid the bills, if he has complimented you, all these things can stimulate you. So you weren't thinking about it, but because you can be piqued, you could be pushed, you could be encouraged to that. And that's important, because I know we're talking about the O, but we have to realize that satisfaction does not always, for women, mean the big O. Right. Oftentimes it doesn't. Every experience does not necessarily mean that. And if you look at the studies that have been done, they don't talk about, when they're asking women to fill out those surveys, they don't end with, and did you have an orgasm? They ask, were you satisfied?
Yes.
Because the definition is different for everyone.
Well, everyone, that concludes part 2 of When Docs Talks, ABCs of OOO, everything you need to know about orgasms and women's sexual health. Definitely don't miss part 3. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining.
When dogs talk, when dogs talk, when dogs talk, when dogs talk. When dogs talk, when dogs talk.